Welcome everyone to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. I'm Fred Cobb with InfoSystems. Today we have Josh Davis, Vice President of Marketing, also at InfoSystems, and we're going to be talking about a topic that is in the news quite a bit. Hopefully you haven't fallen victim to it yet. We want to try to keep you from falling victim to it, and that is ransomware. So Josh, we're going to be talking a little bit about the origins of ransomware, why even several years down the road after it first appearing on the scene, it's still very prevalent and even gaining momentum in some cases as far as a way to attack businesses, a way for the cyber criminals to make money. So
I've been hearing more and more news stories about ransomware attacks, like all of those, a school system in Texas and all kinds of stuff, especially like cities and governments, and just seems like it's all over the place now.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about here next couple of minutes about those types of businesses and why some businesses may be more at risk because they are considered either a soft target or because they may have something that is of perceived value that the attackers want to extort. They feel like they can get money quicker. So we'll be talking about all of that. So let's just jump right into it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so to define ransomware, it's really a type of malware, and you may be saying, well, what's malware? So malware is really any type of software that's been created for the intent of doing something destructive to a single workstation, a server on the network, or just an entire enterprise network with servers and workstations, bringing businesses to their knees. It really runs a whole gamut. So there's typically three types of malware. That's in general terms. There are types. One of the types is a worm. A worm has a way of self-producing. In other words, I can create software that has worm-like features. I can put it on computer A. It can automatically go to computer B, computer C. It can be self-regenerating or self-generating and continue to grow across the network, wreaking harm along the way. We have a virus. We've all heard the term virus. We have antivirus hopefully running on our computers or place of business and at home. A virus is really a piece of what should be legitimate software, legitimate code that gets replaced by nefarious code and can do various types of bad things to a computer. Sky's the limit on what it can do, from performance issues to scraping information to lots of other things. And we have a Trojan, really the third type of malware, and a Trojan like the Trojan horse. Back in the days of history, it can come in disguised as something innocent enough, something that kind of comes in under the radar, even it comes in unnoticed, and then at some point it's detonated. So at some point it becomes active, and it can take over systems. It can encrypt files. It can do a lot of bad things on your network. So malware. Ransomware is just a form of malware. Okay. We talked about phishing in our last episode, and phishing is an easy way for cyber criminals to release malware on your network. And you may think, well, why am I such a target? Little old me, I've got a 10-man shop here. Sometimes it is indiscriminate. Sometimes it's just out there. It's out there in the wild. Lots of information, lots of nefarious things already floating around on the network. Through a simple phish email, your business hasn't necessarily been identified as a target. There's not somebody in a dungeon somewhere, a dark room, saying, I want to target that business today. That's not always the case. A lot of times it's just out there floating, and one of your employees, yourself, you happen to click on a phishing email that contains a link. The link will download the malware. In this case, it's ransomware, and bad things can start happening. So
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause to recognize our partner, IBM Software. IBM QRadar is a SIEM software that helps security teams accurately detect and prioritize threats across the enterprise. SIEM is spelled SIEM and stands for Security Information and Event Management. QRadar SIEM provides intelligent insights that enable teams to respond quickly to reduce the impact of security incidents. QRadar SIM is available on premises and in a cloud environment. Take your enterprise security to the next level with InfoSystems and IBM QRadar. You can learn more by downloading the IBM QRadar white paper from the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz. Just go to the podcast blog post for today's episode. Now back to the podcast.
There are some industries that are, and I use the term a soft target or an identified target for more formal ransomware type campaigns. Think about the medical industry.
Yeah.
To a cyber criminal, a patient record is probably one of the most valuable things that they can gain access to. Well, let's say they can't gain access to it. Let's say we don't want to go to the trouble of getting access to the computer, copying that information out, selling that information on the black market or the dark web for people that want to do identity fraud, insurance fraud, things of that nature. Maybe we can make money by leaving the information in place. We just encrypt it to the point where the people that need it to conduct their daily business, they can't access it. So that's extortion defined, really, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you fall victim to a phish. It's got some ransomware in it. And there's lots and lots of fancy names, funny names that have been given to different ransomware that's been released over the last 4 or 5 years. But let's just take one. Let's say you've got CryptoLocker. CryptoLocker is one you may have heard about in the news. So in this particular case, CryptoLocker begins encrypting your files. Let's say you've got a medical record system, an EMR system, electronic medical records. That's your lifeblood. You're a hospital. You're a clinic. All of a sudden, those medical records are encrypted. You come in, or you're sitting there working, all of a sudden, no access to any of your patient information. So something pops up on the screen and says, by the way, your information has been encrypted. We would like 2 Bitcoins, or maybe even 1 Bitcoin, kind of the currency of the cyber criminal, to unlock your files. What's your first inclination, you think?
Well, I mean, if it's me, I don't want to pay the ransom, but you want to get your files back as quick as possible. So you'd probably be thinking, how do I make this happen quickly? And that's probably pay the ransom.
The cyber criminals are thinking the same thing. So they're looking at what industries can go the least amount of time before they have to do something like pay the ransom. So things that are, critical for life care, hospital data, things that are critical for financial transactions, banking information. A lot of times those types of industries, universities, they're a soft target as well. Think about your average university, lots and lots of students needing lots of access to the internet. Lots of information could be had potentially, student information, lots of personally identifiable information in the university's database.
Yeah.
So those are soft targets, and they're consistent targets that cyber criminals feel like I can hit those targets. They're probably going to pay before they try to simply not pay, and as hours goes by or days go by, they are really up against it. They got to get access to their data again to restore normal function. So getting back to what I talked about a minute ago, so those are the types of industries that might be considered targets of organized ransomware schemes, whereas the indiscriminate type could just be you surfing at home, or you out there as a small business owner thinking, why would they attack me? And then you click on that phishing email. There's some ransomware variants that don't really need you to click on a phish email. What they'll do, they'll leverage vulnerabilities in your network. Microsoft releases updates, they call it Patch Tuesday. They release updates every second Tuesday of the month, and sometimes they have out-of-band updates, but they're constantly trying to stay ahead, or they're getting information where there's a security bug in a piece of software they manufacture, and they're applying patches. Well, if you're not diligent in applying patches, a cyber criminal can try to exploit the fact that you haven't applied patches, and they can automate software to try to exploit that you haven't applied patches. So you may fall victim and you didn't click on that fish. You simply have a system that hasn't been patched appropriately. All of a sudden your data is unavailable.
And I guess if you're a soft target, as you described it, people may be actively trying to penetrate your networks in that way.
Yes, if you were just to take a packet capture, in other words, if you were to look at network traffic hitting any business out there, I don't care if it's a one-man shop to General Motors, if you look at what's happening at the firewall, right at the edge of the network before it's connected to the internet, you'll see tons of nefarious traffic from countries such as Russia, from China, other countries. So it could be nation state sponsored even, or it could be even domestic sponsorship. But there's different ways, different threat vectors or different attack vectors, let's say, different ways, in other words, the ransomware can make its way onto your network.
I think a lot of times people aren't really thinking about who are the people on the other side of this attack. You mentioned nation states. I know I've heard it a lot of times can be organized crime.
Can be.
Because they want to get the data, sell it on the black market. I mean, they're just trying to make money. And so who, other than organized criminals and nation states, who are the other people conducting these attacks, and why is it important for people to be aware that this stuff is just going on all the time?
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, we mentioned in our phishing episode about the fact that you could, if you were of criminal intent, could buy phishing kits. Same is true with ransomware.
Yeah.
You can, let's say you're someone that's bent on doing something nefarious. You can go to the dark web. You can obtain these kits, and you can, unfortunately, the fact that you can attain that type of code, you don't have to be a brilliant software developer that's come up with a very sophisticated way to attack. You can buy these kits. And what's happening, it's a business model. It's a business methodology. So the creators of these kits, they will sell you these kits, and then they will take a percentage of your income as you're making money for people paying ransom. And the criminals are somewhat, they're somewhat intelligent in the way that they typically charge a small amount of money. They're figuring, well, if I were to successfully launch a ransomware campaign against this organization, and if I were to charge them $1 million, they're probably not going to be able to afford it.
Right.
They're probably, but if I say it'll cost you $1,000 to get your files unencrypted and working again, so companies looking around, hey, do we have good backups? I mean, we'll be talking about a later episode about the things you can do to defend yourself against this type of attack. But there are, through this business methodology, they've priced the extortion at a point where a lot of companies will just simply pay the money because it's easier to do that. Now, are you automatically guaranteed you're going to get your files back? Depending on which stat you look at, about 60% of companies do end up paying ransom when ransomware is, when they fall victim to a ransomware attack. Roughly 70% of those companies actually get their files back.
Yeah.
So they're criminals. Now maybe there's a little bit of trustworthiness. Hey, you gave us some money. Okay, we'll be good enough to let you have your files. We'll give you the decryption key so you get access to your files again. That's not always the case.
Yeah, I did hear somebody explain that the criminals want to establish credibility as far as returning or decrypting the files, because they want it to become public knowledge that if you pay us, you'll get your stuff back, because then they're going to get paid more.
Yeah, if they never provided you the decryption keys, the reputation would be, well, I'm hit. Why would I pay you when, regardless if I pay you, I'm never going to get my files unlocked?
Yeah.
So there is this element. Well, we gotta provide some type of decryption service, and there are help desks. There are companies set up to help you as a consumer or as a business owner that's been hit by ransomware to accept. They're set up to accept payment. They're set up to assist you in decrypting your files. It's insane to be talking about it in that way. But
It's like the PayPal of the dark web or something.
Yes, I mean that's a good analogy, and it's a multi-billion-dollar business. As long as people are willing to pay, as long as people are putting themselves in a position of being infected and having to pay, there's money to be made, and the cyber criminals are going to try to make that money.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's important to understand what is ransomware, why do I need to be concerned about it. I mean, having all of that information is really important, and I really hope that as people listen to this podcast, this episode, future episodes, that they really start to think through these things, take it seriously, and man, it's scary.
This is a big topic, so we're not going to spend just this podcast on the topic. We want to talk about ways to defend, other ways to detect that it may be within your organization. It may not have become active yet. So it's a whole different series of things we can discuss specific to ransomware, because it's a big deal right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover when you think about it, but this podcast will be going weekly for the foreseeable future. So, we've got plenty of time to share this information out there. That's great.
That's right. That's all the time we have for today, but we're going to pick up the ransomware discussion in our next podcast. We hope you'll tune in. Thank you very much. Thank you, Josh. And we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Good information.
Thanks. Goodbye.